How could beings as fragile as us endure a world sculpted in ice? The question feels almost absurd. Strip away our homes, our machines, our warm clothes, and what remains? Skin too thin, teeth too dull, claws non-existent. In the hierarchy of predators, we were laughable, soft prey wandering a killing ground. And yet, against all reason, our kind walked into the teeth of the Ice Age, and survived. Imagine the air itself turning against you. Each breath didn't feed you, it sliced you. The cold burned the lungs, a knife made of frost sawing through your chest with every gasp. The wind howled like an endless beast, not a gust but a living predator, peeling the flesh as warmth, leaving your body weaker with each passing hour. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't hide from it. You could only endure, one shivering moment at a time. Before your eyes stretched a graveyard of white. The horizon rolled outward in every direction, not a promise but a prison. Snow upon snow, ice upon ice, until your eyes throbbed with pain just from staring. The earth itself had become stone, frozen so solid that even death could not sink beneath it. A body left on the tundra would not rot, it would be locked in ice, preserved like an eternal warning. This was not land made for humans. It was a stage where extinction waited patiently, and yet, still, they walked. Every step was betrayal. The snow collapsed underfoot, clutching at ankles like hands of the dead, dragging you down, making you question whether forward meant survival or only a slower death. But to stop, that was unthinkable. To stop was to give yourself to the cold. Hunger stalked them like a shadow that never left. It wasn't the hunger of skipping a meal, or the hunger that growls mildly in your stomach today. It was a gnawing emptiness that clawed at ribs, dulled the mind, and whispered madness. For days, no prey appeared. Tracks vanished beneath storms before they could be followed. And when at last the beasts did show themselves, they were no easy meal. They were titans. Mammoths loomed like moving mountains, tusks gleaming like scythes carved from ice. Cave lions slinked at the edges of shadow, golden eyes unblinking, waiting for one stumble, one moment of weakness. Even the wolves, skeletal with hunger, circled the tribes as though rehearsing for the feast they would one day claim. Around you, your people staggered. Faces were hollow. Lips cracked and bleeding. Their clothing, stitched from skins and furs, flapped uselessly against the storm. A child whimpered, the sound no stronger than a bird's cry, and the wind stole it away instantly. Mothers clutched them tighter, desperate to share warmth, though their own bodies had little left to give, only fire stood between them and oblivion. A fragile flame, trembling in a pit of stone, its light flickering against frozen faces. Without it, the darkness would devour them, and the cold would hollow them from the inside out. But even fire was weak here, its crackle smothered by the storm's roar. To guard it was not convenience, it was life itself. Think about it, animals were born for this world. Fur grew thick, claws ripped through frost, instincts guided them to food. Humans had none of that. Naked, soft, slower than prey, weaker than predators. And yet, we endured. Against hunger. Against fear. Against a world sculpted to erase us. That is the disturbing paradox at the heart of our story, that the weakest creatures in the Ice Age became the only ones who would carry its memory forward. Mammoths, saber-tooths, cave lions, they vanished. But the fragile, hairless ape with fire and stone? They endured. Tonight, on Disturbing Tale, we step into that frozen nightmare, not with the safety of hindsight, but with the raw terror of those who lived it. This is not just history. This is survival stripped to its bone. So I ask again, how could creatures as weak as us possibly endure a world of ice? To understand what our ancestors endured, we must first understand the world they walked in. The Ice Age was not merely winter, it was a prison carved from frost. Roughly 20,000 years ago, during the period scientists call the last glacial maximum, the Earth was locked in its most brutal freeze. Vast sheets of ice covered almost a third of the planet's surface. These glaciers were not small hills of snow, they were mountains of frozen water, some more than 2 miles thick, grinding continents beneath their weight. The climate was unrelenting. In parts of Eurasia and North America, temperatures plunged up to 18 degrees Celsius lower than what we know today. To you, that might sound like a mere number. But to those who breathed it, it was the difference between lungs that filled with life and lungs that burned with every inhale. Rivers did not flow, they froze into silence. Lakes became mirrors of glass, so solid that they swallowed forests whole beneath them. Even the oceans shrank, water locked away as endless ice, revealing new bridges of land where waves once crashed. The Arctic skies offered no rescue. What little light fell upon the world was weak, pale, stretched thin as though the sun itself were dying. Days bled into nights, and nights bled into void. In the winters, darkness was near absolute, skies so black they seemed torn open, stars like tiny wounds in the fabric of the universe. Imagine walking beneath that endless black, not knowing if dawn would ever return. And yet, this frozen wasteland was alive, alive in ways that terrified and humbled the fragile humans who crossed it. This was the domain of giants. The woolly mammoth lumbered across the plains, its shaggy coat a fortress against the cold, its tusks curling outward like weapons forged by gods. To hunt one was insanity. To ignore one was starvation. But mammoths were not alone. The reindeer herds thundered across the ice, a river of antlers and hooves that could crush a man underfoot. Step into their path, and you were trampled before you could even raise your spear. Bison roamed as well, hulking beasts with shoulders like living battering rams, charging without hesitation when threatened. These creatures were not prey as we imagine today, they were forces of nature, and to face them was to wager life against hunger. And predators owned this world. The saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, stalked the shadows with curved fangs so long they could pierce a skull with a single strike. Cave lions, larger than any lion alive today, hunted in packs, their golden eyes gleaming from the dark mouths of caverns. Dire wolves, heavier, stronger cousins of the wolves we know, followed human footsteps like phantoms, waiting for the weak to fall behind. Every howl carried by the wind was a reminder, you were never alone, and you were never safe. The land itself was merciless. There were no orchards, no fields of grain, no comfort of fertile soil. Vegetation clung to existence in brittle tufts, roots buried beneath frost, edible only to those who knew where to search. Wild plants were not bounty, they were bitter, sparse, hard-earned scraps that kept starvation at bay for a day, never for a lifetime. Each morsel of food had to be stolen, from the beasts, from the land, from the very jaws of death. This was a world where survival was not natural. It was defiance. The very air sought to strip you to bone. The ground itself conspired to bury you in snow. Even the beasts of the earth waited for your mistake, ready to scatter your remains into the silence. Scientists today can still trace the scars of this frozen age. Across North America and Eurasia, they find carved valleys, gouged out by glaciers like knives slicing across continents. They unearth frozen bones of mammoths, their flesh preserved in permafrost as if the ice age ended yesterday. Some carcasses still carry grass in their stomachs, meals swallowed just before death, trapped forever in frozen time. Archaeologists uncover the tools of early hunters scattered beside these bones, stone blades, flint spear tips, bone harpoons, proof that fragile humans dared to stand against giants. And yet, for all its violence, the Ice Age was not simply death. It was also a crucible, a furnace in which humanity's resilience was forged. In these endless winters, something extraordinary happened, the weak refused to vanish. They adapted. They studied the movements of herds, reading tracks in snow the way we read words on a page. They learned the rhythm of seasons, understanding when rivers would freeze and when herds would migrate. They took fire, this fragile, flickering miracle, and carried it from place to place, as sacred as blood. The Ice Age was not simply an age of cold. It was an age of becoming. Every freezing night, every empty stomach, every predator lurking in the dark pushed humanity closer to what we are now. They were forced to invent, forced to cooperate, forced to imagine new ways to live. Without the cruelty of this world, the fragile ape might never have become the creature we are today. So when you picture the Ice Age, do not imagine only snow. Imagine a battlefield, where every breath was rebellion. Imagine a stage where nature itself demanded, prove you deserve to exist, or be erased. This was the reality of the Ice Age. And against all odds, our kind whispered back, we will not vanish. If cold was the first enemy, hunger was the second, and it never left their side. It gnawed from within, an emptiness that hollowed the ribs and dulled the mind. This was not hunger as you know it, the mild complaint of a skipped meal. This was hunger as a predator, whispering madness into the brain, making every thought bend toward one desperate question. Where will the next meal come from? The Ice Age was a time when food was currency, power, and life itself. Every mouth to feed was a weight dragging at the tribe. Every child's cry was a countdown. The weak fell first, the elderly, their strength unraveling quietly, until their eyes became vacant, already surrendering to snow. Even children were not spared. Their cries were fragile, thin as bird calls, and when the wind swallowed those cries, silence followed. To let hunger win was not to starve, it was to vanish, erased without memory. And so, survival demanded blood. The hunt was not a choice. It was law. It was necessity. To hunt in the Ice Age meant standing against monsters. The mammoth, shaggy, armored in a coat of fur, tusks stretching longer than a man's body, was a walking fortress. One swing of its trunk or tusk could shatter a skull, crush ribs, or scatter hunters like straw. And yet, its flesh meant weeks of food, its fat meant fire and warmth, its bones became spears, shelters, even needles. To walk away was starvation. To fight was terror. But hunger does not respect fear. Reindeer were another lifeline. They thundered across the frozen plains in herds, hooves striking the earth like drums of war. To chase them was to risk exhaustion, trampling, or being skewered by antlers. But to catch them meant meat, hides for clothing, sinew for thread. The tribe shadowed their migrations like ghosts, waiting for the chance to strike. Then there were bison, massive, broad-shouldered, dangerous. A single charge could send a hunter flying, bones shattered before the kill was even made. But their meat could keep a camp alive for days. Archaeological evidence shows entire groups working together to drive bison into pits or over cliffs, sacrificing some hunters so that the rest could eat. That was the reality of hunger. It demanded courage beyond measure, sometimes demanded lives. Yet not all prey were giants. Smaller animals, hares, birds, even fish pulled from frozen rivers, were hunted with equal desperation. Their meat was meager, but in a world where children cried themselves hoarse from starvation, even a scrap was salvation. Archaeologists have found delicate bone harpoons and hooks, evidence of how humans clawed at every possible source of food. Still, the hunt often failed. And when it did, desperation grew teeth. Humans became scavengers, prowling the snow for carcasses left behind by predators. There, among gnawed bones and frozen hides, they fought against wolves, lions, even bears for scraps of flesh clinging to rib cages. They cracked bones to suck out marrow, dug their teeth into frozen tendons. To some, this may sound humiliating, but in the Ice Age, pride had no place. A scrap of meat was the difference between a child waking tomorrow or becoming another frozen body lost to the tundra. But hunger was not only about prey. It was about strategy. A lone hunter with a spear was nothing. A tribe with a plan was death itself. Together, they became more than fragile bodies, they became cunning. Some drove prey toward cliffs, others into bogs, others into traps carved into the earth. Hunters surrounded herds, hurling spears in coordinated waves until exhaustion brought even giants crashing to the ground. In the frozen wastelands, cooperation was not kindness, it was survival written into law. Without it, no spear was sharp enough, no hunter strong enough. Archaeological digs confirm this strategy. At sites like Dolny Vestinis in the Czech Republic and Mazyrik in Ukraine, piles of mammoth bones have been unearthed, showing coordinated kills. Spears tipped with flint blades are found lodged in rib bones. Fire pits surrounded by butchered remains tell the same story again and again. Fragile humans stood against giants, and sometimes, they won. The psychological weight of hunger cannot be overstated. Imagine days without food, your muscles trembling, your mind drifting into haze. Imagine walking across ice, every step weaker than the last, while knowing that somewhere ahead is the herd that could save your people, or bury them all. Hunger was not just physical. It was spiritual. It demanded sacrifice, demanded belief that risk was worth the blood. And when the kill finally came, it was not just relief, it was ecstasy. The tribe gathered around the carcass, knives of stone flashing as they tore flesh from bone. Fat was prized above all, rich, life-giving, able to burn in lamps or melt into broth. Nothing was wasted. The hide became clothing. The bones became tools. The sinew became thread. Even the skull was sometimes set upright, perhaps as a warning to predators, perhaps as a prayer to whatever gods they believed watched over them. This was hunger in the Ice Age. Relentless, merciless, a shadow that stalked them through every storm. To ignore it was to die. To answer it was to risk death in another form. They hunted beasts 10 times their size with nothing but sharpened stones. They scavenged frozen carcasses from the jaws of wolves. They gambled their lives again and again, because in this world, hunger demanded nothing less. Fire. It was the line between existence and extinction. In the age of ice, fire was more than a tool, it was a lifeline. Imagine stepping into a world where the sun gave no warmth, where nights stretched so long they seemed eternal, and where predators with eyes like burning coals prowled just beyond the shadows. In this world, a spark was salvation. For early humans, discovering how to command fire was not simply an invention, it was a revolution. Archaeologists tell us that fire-making dates back hundreds of thousands of years, but in the last glacial maximum, when the world was at its coldest, fire became more urgent than ever. To survive without it was unthinkable. Without fire, food remained raw and dangerous, nights were unlit tombs, and the cold gnawed at flesh until death arrived quietly in sleep. With fire, humanity did not just endure, they began to shape nature itself. Fire served many masters. It cooked food, unlocking nutrients that raw flesh could not give. Scientists today know that cooking was directly tied to the expansion of the human brain, allowing calories to be digested faster, fueling intelligence. Around a fire, fatty mammoth meat turned from a slab of frozen death into nourishment. Tubers and roots, once poisonous, became edible. With every crackle of flame, the line between man and beast grew wider. But fire was more than fuel, it was protection. Cave lions, dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats ruled the night. The dark was their hunting ground, and humans without fire were prey. Flames formed a moving barrier that predators feared. Imagine a circle of stone hearths glowing red inside a cavern, smoke curling upwards, children huddled close while shadows of beasts flickered on the walls. Fire turned fragile humans into untouchable survivors. And yet, fire was fragile too. A storm could drown it. A careless hand could scatter its embers. Without matches or lighters, relighting a fire in the dead of winter was a near impossible task. Evidence from sites like Dolny Vestinis in the Czech Republic shows how much care Ice Age people placed into preserving embers, sometimes carrying them across entire landscapes inside bundles of bark or hollowed bones. Fire was never taken for granted. It was guarded as one would guard a child, because to lose it was to invite death. But survival demanded more than fire, it demanded shelter. The earth itself had turned hostile. Glaciers carved valleys and suffocated plains. Blizzards swept across the tundra, and wind cut like knives. To endure, humans became builders. Caves were the first havens. The walls of Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira do not only hold paintings of bison and mammoths, they also whisper of families who once made their homes beneath dripping stone. Caves offered safety, but they were not always available. So humans began to create shelter where none existed. Archaeologists in Ukraine discovered something astonishing: huts built entirely from mammoth bones, dating back 15,000 years. These shelters were massive, sometimes over 12 feet wide, framed with jawbones and ribs, and covered with hides to block the cold. Imagine the labor, dragging the colossal bones of a fallen giant, stacking them into domes, stitching hides with bone needles, and sealing seams with clay. Inside, fire pits glowed, smoke rising through small vents. Here, families could rest, plan, and dream, even as the blizzard screamed outside. Elsewhere, humans carved shelter from snow itself. Much like the Inuit of later times, Ice Age hunters learned to build igloo-like structures, pressing snow into walls that insulated better than stone. A snow shelter could trap heat, turning the deadly cold into survivable warmth. What seems fragile to us today was, in their hands, the architecture of endurance. Shelter was more than a shield, it was a home, a place where memory lived. Firesides became classrooms where elders told stories, where children learned skills, and where myths were born. Within these shelters, humans found something deeper than survival: they found belonging. A tribe was not just a collection of bodies, it was a circle bound by the warmth of flame and the safety of walls. Even today, archaeologists uncover hearths blackened by smoke and bones charred by fire. These are not just remains, they are echoes of resilience. They tell us that survival was not about strength alone, it was about ingenuity, about knowing how to bend a hostile world to human will. Fire and shelter turned prey into predator, wanderers into builders, and fragile mortals into the architects of civilization. On the channel Disturbing Tale, we tell stories not of glory, but of survival. And in the Ice Age, there was no greater miracle than fire's glow and the fragile bones of a shelter against the endless cold. They had no steel, no engines, no machines. Only stone, bone, wood, and sinew. Yet from these raw fragments of the earth, early humans forged a future. It was invention, not brute strength, that became their greatest weapon against the Ice Age. Picture a hunter kneeling by the light of a small fire. In his hands, a flint core. He strikes stone against stone, and why? Sparks leap, and then, there it is, an edge sharp enough to slice through hide, sharp enough to carve meat from bone, sharp enough to kill. This was not just survival. It was foresight, imagination, an understanding that the world could be shaped by human hands. Archaeologists have found these tools scattered across ancient sites, silent witnesses to the ingenuity of Ice Age peoples. The Aurignacian culture, spanning Europe some 40,000 years ago, left behind blades so precise they could still cut today. Long, slender points carved from flint and chert. Burins, chisels that etched lines into bone and ivory. Scrapers, used to strip hides of fat, transforming stiff animal skins into pliable clothing. Each tool was a miracle of design, born from trial, error, and necessity. But survival demanded more than sharp edges. The cold was merciless, gnawing at exposed flesh, threatening frostbite and death. And so, humans invented something equally remarkable: the needle. A sliver of bone, drilled with a tiny hole, smoothed until it gleamed. With thread spun from sinew or plant fibers, these needles stitched together hides into tunics, cloaks, and boots. At Mazyrik in Ukraine, archaeologists unearthed mammoth bone dwellings, and nearby, the delicate needles that stitched reindeer hides into warmth. Clothing was not luxury, it was armor against extinction. This was invention as shield. And yet, invention also became spear. Spears tipped with flint or bone could pierce the hide of a mammoth, but as the prey grew more dangerous, humans adapted. They created the otlotl, a spear thrower, a simple lever carved from wood or antler that launched projectiles with deadly force. What once required proximity and courage could now be done from a safer distance. It was technology shifting the balance of power. Suddenly, fragile humans could challenge the giants of their world. Every discovery was born of desperation. The cold killed without pity. Hunger hollowed stomachs. Beasts prowled in the dark. But humans had something no other creature possessed, the ability to imagine what could be. To take the memory of failure, the spear that snapped, the hide that tore, and transform it into something stronger. In France, at sites like Abri-Castanet, archaeologists found carved fragments of ivory and bone, tools, yes, but also something more. The edges are smoothed, not just functional but crafted with care. Aesthetic flourishes, marks that serve no obvious purpose. And in that, we glimpse something extraordinary, invention not only for survival, but for expression. Because tools were not only weapons of the body. They were extensions of the mind. Carvings of animals etched into spear throwers. Small figurines, like the Venus statues, shaped from mammoth ivory, with exaggerated forms. These were not meant to cut or kill. They were symbols, beliefs rendered in matter. A sign that humans were inventing not only ways to live, but ways to remember, to dream, to hope. And so, invention became culture. Flint blades passed from hunter to apprentice. Needles carried from mother to daughter. Knowledge itself became a tool, passed through memory and ritual. Imagine sitting in the glow of a fire, a tribe gathered close. An elder places a tool in a child's hands. Teaches them the rhythm of stone on stone, the patience required to split a flake just right. The child's hands tremble, but the knowledge has been given. Invention was survival not only in the present, but survival into the future. Without these creations, humanity would have perished. Naked in the ice, teeth against mammoth hide, bare hands against claws and fangs, we were nothing. But with tools, we became something more. The predators feared our fire, the prey fell to our spears, the cold was repelled by our sewn hides. The Ice Age did not change to suit humanity. Humanity changed itself to endure the Ice Age. And so invention became destiny. The spark of the flint was the spark of civilization itself. The needle, the spear, the carving, all whispers of a truth that would echo for millennia: survival is not given, it is created. And these first inventions, so fragile, so humble, were the ancestors of every technology we hold today. Alone, the Ice Age was a death sentence. The cold did not forgive weakness, and the predators that stalked the night never gave second chances. But humans discovered something their rivals never mastered. Something more powerful than claws, thicker than fur, sharper than teeth. It was not just a tool or a weapon, it was the tribe. Cooperation was the one adaptation that made us unstoppable. Picture a winter night in the Pleistocene. The wind screams across the plains, carrying ice shards that cut the skin raw. Wolves circle just beyond the fire's reach, their yellow eyes glinting like embers in the dark. If you were alone, you would not last until dawn. But in a group, the fear shifts. The hunter at the edge keeps the fire stoked. The mothers clutch children wrapped in furs. The elders whisper warnings, stories of what happens to those who wander too far. The tribe does not merely exist beside you, it becomes your shield. Archaeological evidence reveals this truth. At Shanidar Cave in modern-day Iraq, skeletons of Neanderthals were found showing signs of injury and disability. One man had withered limbs, so damaged he could not hunt or fend for himself. And yet, he lived for years. He was fed. He was sheltered. He was protected. This was not chance. This was community. Even in the harshest ages, humans carried their weak. Compassion itself became a survival strategy. But cooperation was not only physical, it was memory. Stories, spoken in flickering firelight, became survival manuals. Imagine the elder crouched low, pointing to the shadows on the cave wall. He speaks of the ice cracking beneath careless feet, of rivers that swallowed hunters whole, of animals that must never be faced without spears tipped in fire. These were not fairy tales. They were survival codes, encoded in narrative so the next generation would not repeat deadly mistakes. In the absence of books, the human mind became the library. Memory preserved in story became the tribe's greatest weapon against extinction. Art carried the same weight. The caves of Lascaux and Chauvet in France, painted some 17,000 to 30,000 years ago, are not simply beautiful, they are functional. They depict bison, horses, aurochs, mammoths, creatures central to survival. These images are believed to be more than decoration. They were visual archives, teaching tools, and perhaps rituals meant to prepare the tribe for the hunt. When a child saw the painted outline of a bison on stone, they were not only learning what it looked like. They were absorbing knowledge of its form, its movement, and its spirit. This cooperation extended to innovation. To make a spear, one hand carved flint, another fetched sinew to lash the blade, another sewed hide clothing to endure the hunt. Alone, none could master all skills. Together, each person became a part of a living machine. Specialization was born, not as luxury, but as necessity. And so, the Ice Age tribes functioned as a single organism. The young risked their lives at the hunt's front. The mothers gathered roots and herbs to nourish the weak. The elders carried the map of memory, guiding migrations toward rivers, valleys, and hunting grounds. Each member was not an individual survivor but a cell in a body far larger than themselves. Even burial rituals show how deeply cooperation shaped human life. Bodies found in Sungur, Russia, were adorned with beads, ivory spears, and red ochre. Death was not an end, it was shared, honored. This meant the living carried the weight of the dead, binding them to the tribe's ongoing story. Through ritual, humans declared something no animal dared: you are not forgotten. You remain with us. And in those moments, another survival tool was born: identity. We became more important than I. This sense of shared fate was humanity's greatest shield. No predator could match it. No storm could erase it. While the cave lion hunted with muscle, humans hunted with unity. While the mammoth survived on size, humans survived on memory. And while the ice itself sought to erase all life, humans carved out a promise through cooperation: we will endure together. And so the tribe became the bridge. Across generations. Across frozen rivers. Across continents. It was the tribe that carried fire, stories, tools, and courage from one mouth, one hand, one heart, to the next. Without it, we would not be here. The Ice Age was not a prison. It was a test. And the test had only one answer: movement. When food disappeared, when rivers froze into glass, when mammoth herds drifted toward horizons beyond sight, early humans had to follow. To stay meant death. To move meant a chance, fragile, uncertain, but a chance nonetheless. And so, migration became humanity's greatest gamble. Archaeology reveals their paths. From the valleys of East Africa to the steppes of Central Asia, from the frozen plains of Siberia to the shores of Ice Age Europe, small bands of humans carried not just their bodies, but their stories, their tools, their fire. They walked not for miles, but for generations. Entire bloodlines became rivers of footsteps flowing across continents. Consider the Bering Land Bridge. 20,000 years ago, sea levels dropped by nearly 120 meters, exposing a stretch of land between Siberia and Alaska. Wind-scoured and treeless, it was no paradise. But it was a bridge, and for desperate hunters chasing mammoth herds, it was enough. Crossing it meant entering a new world. They did not know they were stepping into the Americas. They only knew that behind them was hunger, and ahead was possibility. Every migration was a leap into the unknown. Imagine walking for weeks across a glacier where the sun never rises high. Your feet crack, your lungs burn with ice, your child weeps on your back. Ahead, the elders whisper that there might be forests, rivers, prey. But what if there is nothing? What if the world ends beyond this horizon? Still, they walked. Because to turn back was to die. Science traces these movements in fragments: stone tools left in riverbeds, fire pits buried beneath layers of loess, human remains preserved in caves. Each discovery tells us the same story, that survival was never passive. It demanded courage beyond imagination. These were not wanderers. They were pioneers, forced into exile by nature itself, yet bold enough to conquer it step by step. And it was not just survival. Migration forged identity. As bands of humans split and spread, languages diverged. Customs evolved. Myths were born. The people of the mammoth steppe became different from the people of the tundra forests. Yet across the divide, they all shared one truth: they endured only because they moved together. Migration was also the seed of culture. Cave paintings in Chauvet and Lascaux do not merely depict animals. They are maps of memory, instructions whispered across generations: where the herds run, when the bison migrate, how the hunt must be prepared. Rock carvings in Siberia and ochre markings in South Africa show the same instinct: to preserve knowledge, to leave behind a trail for those yet unborn. And so, legacy was born. They survived not just in flesh, but in symbols, in traditions, in the very rhythm of humanity's pulse. We know today that every person alive carries echoes of those migrations in their DNA. The genes of the Ice Age flow in your veins. The strength that carried a woman across an ice field, the endurance that let a man pull his bleeding comrade to safety, the willpower that made a child cling to life in a storm, all of it survived, because you exist. Now pause. Ask yourself, what do we inherit from them? It is not only their blood, but their courage. Their defiance in the face of extinction. They were fragile creatures against a merciless earth, yet they refused to vanish. And because of that refusal, civilization was born. The Ice Age ended. The glaciers retreated. Forests grew again. The earth warmed, and rivers once more carried fish. Humanity flourished. Villages rose, then cities, then empires. But beneath every monument stands a truth carved in ice and blood: none of this would exist if those early wanderers had not chosen to walk forward, again and again, into the unknown. And now, their story is ours. Because though the glaciers are gone, the test remains. Every generation faces its own wilderness. Wars, famine, climate, despair. The conditions change, but the question is the same: will you endure, or will you vanish? So I ask you, as those ancient mothers and fathers once asked themselves, could you have carried a child across frozen rivers? Could you have braved seas in skin boats, steering only by stars? Could you have faced predators 10 times your size, armed only with fire and faith? For them, the answer was not choice, it was destiny. They endured. They walked. They conquered the impossible. And now their story belongs to us. Their fire is in your breath. Their blood is in your heart. Their endurance is your inheritance. This is their disturbing tale. This is your legacy. And this is Disturbing Tale, where history reminds us of the unbreakable bond between survival and sacrifice.